Hi everybody, it's great to be back here on Itamar. It is Friday, it is Shushan Purim, and today's lesson will be devoted to Purim, B'Gezrat Hashem, God willing. Purim is a very unusual holiday, it can be strange even. There are so many different kinds of things that we do. First of all, getting ready for the holiday, we begin by Shabbat Zachor. The Shabbat before Purim is called Shabbat Zachor, remembering Amalek. That's one idea. Then we go on as we move closer. We have the fast of Esther, the Queen Esther fast, which is a day of repentance. And then the day before Purim, which is a fast itself, right? We give also the machzita shekel, the half a shekel coin, which was used, remembering the ancient custom, of giving the half a shekel coin for the temple, for the public sacrifices. And then we go on to the Purim day itself. At night we read the Megillah, the beautiful story of Queen Esther and Mordechai, and then we read it again in the morning, so it's not enough to read it once, read it again in the morning. And then we have, of course, special laws that are involved in showing our comradeship, our love for our fellow neighbors, called Mishalach Manot, giving out food to our friends and neighbors, and also helping the poor, Matanot Evyonim, and then we get a nice big meal, a banquet, and then we get a little tipsy, drinking a little bit. Whatever it is, this holiday has so many different kinds of ideas to it. Not only that, it's the only holiday that depends on your location where you celebrate it. Most places celebrate the holiday on the 14th day of Adar. But the cities that have walls surrounding them, going way back in the times of Joshua, have to celebrate it on the 15th day, a day later. So it's so weird. Every holiday we have is celebrated only on the same time for everyone from all of Israel. Here it sort of feels a little weird. I'm right, for example, today I'm traveling to Jerusalem for the weekend, God willing, for Shabbat. I was invited for also the Purim banquet in Jerusalem as a friend at a friend's house. So I will be celebrating the Purim banquet again when I go to Jerusalem with someone. Although yesterday we celebrated here on Itamar, so it's very interesting that there's 2 days and it's so weird. It's a weird kind of feeling. Usually a holiday is a holiday for everybody. And here it's, of course, there are things that, unite us both. It's a special day for all of Israel, both days. But it's very interesting that this was an element of the holiday, dividing it into 2 parts. Very unusual. And it's really unusual is that this holiday, if you think about it, was really... all the other holidays are focused on the land of Israel. Why? If we talk about, take Passover, for example. Passover is leaving Egypt, right? Our goal to get to Israel. Sukkot, remembering the clouds of glory. Of course, on the way through the desert, making our way to Israel. Receiving Torah, Shavuot, for the purpose of coming to the land of Israel. And here, this is a holiday we're celebrating a victory over Amalek in exile. It's a little weird. It seems to be weird. And all holidays have to be connected to Israel, so we have to find those connections. So it's also very interesting. So I just mentioned that the focal point on Purim is many different areas. Again, Pesach, you can say, Passover, one theme. Sukkot, one basic theme. There also we shake the lulav and etrog, but still it's all connected to the Sukkah. If you ask someone, what is the holiday of Sukkot all about? You talk about the Sukkah. Shavuot, all about giving the Torah. Rosh Hashanah, the New Year, all about the New Year, right? All about the world being, man being created. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, all about repentance. And here, Purim, we have all these concepts. We have Amalek, remembering. We have the half a shekel. We have the banquet. Things that are so helping the poor people, showing our love for one another. There are so many different concepts that seem to be, they don't connect to that one theme, which is very interesting about Purim itself. And how does this all come to be? Now, discussing Purim is a huge discourse, and we're not going to get it all today, of course. And I started writing my essay, but I don't think I'm going to finish it maybe by next year. But there are just so many things that are going on here in Purim. And I'd like to focus today, bringing a few different sources, and hopefully somehow getting some kind of response, or some kind of answer to the questions, or to understanding this very unusual holiday we have, Purim, which is so special. And I'll begin by reading the words of the Rambam, Maimonides, in the laws regarding the Megillah. He says something very unusual, which is based on a Talmudic passage in the tractate of Megillah in the Jerusalem tractate. And he says like this. He says, this is brought down in the Laws of the Rambam in chapter 2:18. And he says like this: all the books of the prophets and all the holy writings will be nullified in the Messianic era. And Rambam's writing something. Here's the book of laws. This is really, he's basing it on a midrash, which we know is always teaching us something, deep things behind concepts. But he's mentioning it in the book of laws here. That you should know, the Rambam says in the Messianic time, all the books of the prophets, call what Isaiah, Jeremiah, all those prophets will be sort of pushed aside, with the exception of the book of Esther. And he's saying there will be one exception. The book of Esther, that's going to be around. That's going to be the focal point. It will continue to exist, as with the 5 books of the Torah. Of course, all the 5 books of the Torah. We can't stop doing the commandments. And of course, the oral law, the Rambam says, not the laws of the oral law, which will never be nullified. These things will constantly, of course, keep. But our focus is not going to be on the other books of the prophets. Something about the book of Queen Esther, HaMegillah, is going to be so powerful that we're going to continue with this. And he goes on to say, although all memories of the difficulties endured by our people will be nullified, right? The difficult things will be nullified. As Isaiah says in 65:16, what does Isaiah say? For the former difficulties will be forgotten, for they will be hidden from my eye. The celebration of the days of Purim will not be nullified. So we'll always remember the celebration. We'll always celebrate Purim. As it states, if we look in the Megillat Esther itself, it says, and these days of Purim will not pass among the Jews, nor will their remembrance cease from their seed. Which means Purim is so special that we'll constantly be celebrating this special holiday all the time. Wow. Is that a powerful statement? First of all, it's a powerful statement because how can we say Isaiah and Jeremiah, Samuel, all the prophets are going to disappear? And of course, there are different explanations. Obviously, the books are going to be around. It's very important lessons over there. But we have to say, in reality, this is what the Ravid, who always adds different comments on the Rambam, says. It's just that they're going to be around those books. But of course, our focus is going to be on something very special. We have to try to realize some message behind the Megillah, behind the story of Esther, is so great that it's going to overshadow other messages. And we have to see why and understand. And this will help us understand some of the opening things we spoke about beforehand. In order to get back to this, I'd like to bring down another passage of oral law, the Talmud in the tractate of Chulin. And it brings it down very interesting. It says there are 4 particular personalities that the Talmud wants to find where they're indicated, where they're hinted to in the Torah. So the Talmud asks, Moshe min Torah minayin, where is Moses reflected to in the Torah? His name. And the Talmud answers, it says, B'shagam hu basar, talking about the generation that was destroyed by the flood. It says a man's life will be 120 years. And it says, B'shagam hu basar, he's only flesh, and a man will, like an animal, he will pass away. If you take the letters in Hebrew, B'shagam, it's the exact numerical value of Moshe. It's the letters Shin Mem, which is Moshe Rabbeinu's name, Hebrew name, and the Gimel, B'shagam. And the Bet is 5, which is the Hey, also of Moshe Rabbeinu. So it's interesting. The Talmud finds a very interesting reflection of Moshe Rabbeinu within, after the whole story of the flood story, that the life of man will be 120 years. There it's hidden right away. Then the Talmud goes on to find other names. What are the other names? Haman. Where do we find Haman in the Torah? The evil Haman mentioned in the story of Purim. And the Talmud says, Hamin ha'etz. It says from the tree. Here regarding the sin of the first man, when he ate from the tree, him and his wife, Adam and Eve, when they ate from the tree they weren't supposed to eat. So in Hebrew it says Hamin ha'etz, from the tree. Hamin is Haman, the same exact. So it's bringing us back to the sin of the first man, throwing Haman, Haman, right over there. That's where we find Haman. And then it goes on to 2 more names. It says, where do we find Esther, Queen Esther in the Torah? In the Torah, and it goes on to say, when it says, Anochi astir panai, God will hide his face. Esther means to hide. When the Torah says in Deuteronomy, when God will hide his face, it's referring to Queen Esther. That's the third hint. And the fourth hint is Mordechai. Where do we find the name Mordechai in the Torah? And it says regarding preparing the special oils that were used to anoint the priests. That's mentioned Maldro. Maldro is like the distilled mole of it. It's a spice, one of the fine spices that we used. And in the Targum, the Onkelos, the famous Onkelos translator, translates it as Maladachia. So Maladachia is Mordechai. Maladachia, Mordechai, which is so interesting. But anyway, the question we see here, 4 names that the Talmud is trying to find where they're hinted to in the Torah is, again, Moshe Rabbeinu, Haman, the evil Haman, Haman, Mordechai, and Esther. So 3 out of the 4 are all to do with the story of Purim, and then Moshe Rabbeinu over here. What's going on? What about all the other biblical personalities? Why are we looking for their names? So there's a famous Rashba, one of the great commentaries, on the Talmud, not only on the, again on the, we call the Pilpul of the Talmud on Tosfot, and Rashi brings down interesting, but he also talks about the Agada, the Midrashic aspects, and he brings down something interesting. He says, well, why these names? He asks the question, why these 4 names only searched in the for sources in the Torah? And his answer he gives, these are names were really given by those who weren't Jewish. The daughter of Paro gave the name to Moshe Rabbeinu. He had, we know, if we look in the Chronicles, Moshe Rabbeinu had 10 other names, or altogether 10 names. So like Avigdor, for example, Chever, Yarid, he had different names. And those were Hebrew names. So this really was an Egyptian name, and therefore the Torah wanted, the Talmud wanted to show that this name had a source within the Torah, his Egyptian name as well, and a special meaning to it. The same thing regarding the names of Esther and Mordechai. Esther, the name we see in the Megillah, is called Hadassah. That's a real Hebrew name, and Mordechai is known as Balshan Ptachia. He has also, again, a Hebrew name, and therefore these were Persian names. And therefore, since they were Persian names, because the Megillah was written, don't forget, in Persia, right? And therefore, they wanted to show that these names also had tremendous meanings, and actually search for the meaning, as well as Haman had a Memuchan. So all these names had other names, and they wanted to show the source of these names within the Torah to show that they reflect the very deep things. And that's one explanation of why these names. But in reality, I thought of also, these particular names are all connected to what we just said before, what the Rambam says, that what's going to be around at the end of the road, the focal point is going to be on Purim. We see here the 3 major characters of the story of Purim, Mordechai and Esther, and this evil Haman, right? Plus the fact that we said the 5 books of Moses are going to be around, and Purim. So we see here this sort of hinting to that kind of concept. Moshe Rabbeinu representing the 5 books and the oral law, and these 3 personalities, which the whole story of Esther is all about. That name is within the Torah, saying that's something that's already within the 5 books. It's hinted to within there, showing a very, very important element within the whole story of Purim. But I want to again focus, if we begin with taking Esther, and I'm not going to be able to get to everything on this very, very deep study, which has to be, again, which we have to invest a lot more time. But understanding a little bit about Esther, Queen Esther, her name refers to hiding. It means to hide. It's interesting, the word history comes from Esther. History, Esther, because history is always hiding something in history. What are we hiding in history? In Hebrew it's called historia, where God hides himself. We have to find Hashem who's within history. And the whole story of Megillat Esther is in reality a story where God is hidden, if we look at it. A person could read the story and say, wait a second, here's a king making a banquet, celebrating, why, whatever the reasons is. I'll get to that in a moment, maybe. And here, this evil person named Haman convinces the king to kill the Jews, a final solution. But what happens, eventually, this woman Esther ends up being the queen and able to save, because of certain circumstances of Mordechai revealing that the king, there was a plot against the king. It worked out very well. we can say chance events worked out very, very well to save the people of Israel from destruction at that time. But when a person looks at the story, they can say, okay, it was just coincidental, it was chance. Where is God? God has not even mentioned the whole Megillah. And therefore, it's called the Book of Esther, the book of history, I call it. Or the book of hiding the history, which means hiding God within history. Here we see that in reality, there was a tremendous salvation for the people of Israel. But it was all hidden behind the scene, behind the lines. You have to read through to see the divine providence of this whole thing. But a person wanting to read it a different way, he could read it, unfortunately, and say, okay, it all was chance events. And this lesson is really exactly what the history is all about. Because throughout our historical movement towards redemption process in the world, and seeing how Israel is scattered amongst the nations and eventually return home, we have to follow the path of Israel to see that God, again, is the light, as we say, the lighthouse of the world, within everything and behind everything. We call this divine providence. And those who do not believe in Hashem, in reality, they claim they believe, but they don't see how God is really behind every one of these amazing events that are taking place in our time behind the scenes. It's absolutely amazing. We have to, and that's why the lesson of Esther is so important, to always find Hashem. Where is He? Looking around, what's going on? When the darkest times we see, it seems that Hashem is hiding His face. We must look for God and see where divine providence, in reality, is leading all these events. That's a very important lesson. That's the most important lesson. And that's why this will be around forever. Because we have to find God. Historia means, right, in Hebrew. History is where God is hiding His face. And we have to find Him. That is really the goal of mankind. And the goal of the people of Israel, to be a light to the nations, to find Hashem in the world. And that's what the whole book of Esther is all about, to see how God is behind the scenes. It is so painful if we look. And there's a beautiful Chatam Sofer. I saw an interesting class by a Rav named Rabbi Ilan Tamir, I think, from Machol Meir. He brought down the words of the Chatam Sofer. And I think that connects here as well. The Chatam Sofer, one of the famous giants of Torah, Rav Moshe Sofer, he writes about explaining a Talmudic passage as well, which really connects to what we're saying. And if we look at the Talmud, it says, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, one of the greatest giants of all, says, why were the enemies of Israel in that generation deserving of extermination? Now, why does it say why were the enemies, the Talmud and Megillah, why were the enemies of Israel deserving of extermination? It's not referring to the enemies of Israel, it's referring to Israel, but they use the expression we call in Hebrew saginaho, or in Aramaic. Means when you say someone is blind, you say a lot of light. Why? Because you don't want, it's not a good thing to mention on your breath something that's bad. So you don't want to say your people were deserving of extermination. So you say the enemies were deserving of extermination, but you mean, of course, you're referring to Israel here. And the answer is because they partook of the feast of the wicked one, which means if we look at the opening of the book of Purim, it's all about the feast. And what is this feast all about? They're celebrating the fact that 70 years has passed and the temple, Israel has not returned. Jeremiah promised after 70 years, we return to the land of Israel, rebuild our temple, and it didn't happen yet. And therefore, King Achashverosh took out all the vessels and celebrating that this is not going to happen. And again, everyone, was celebrating, happy, happy as could be, that the redemption didn't take place. But in reality, they got the numbers off a little bit. And here, the painful thing is, it says that why was Israel deserving of extermination? Why did this evil king Haman come about? Because they enjoyed from that meal, that banquet. Now, how many people? It says in the capital of Shushan, how many people could have been at that party? In reality, the Midrash says there were 18,000 people that were Jewish that participated in that party. But because of these 18,000 people, there were Jews scattered all over the kingdoms. Why was all of Israel deserving of extermination? And it doesn't say they ate from the meal, because it says they enjoyed, which means enjoyment, everyone enjoyed. Why? Because everyone looked at that redemption wasn't going to happen. It's brought down in Hosea. One second. My page fell. I wanted to bring down the actual verse from Hosea. It says in the prophet Hosea, chapter 3. And I want to read, I think in English it's Hosea. I don't know how to say it in English. But he says like this. Achal yeshuvu b'nei Yisrael uvikshu et Hashem Eloheim v'et David Malkam ufachadu el Hashem ve'el tuvo b'achit hayamin. He's saying at the end of days, is talking about when the Jewish people will return. It says they will request God, King David, and ufachadu el Hashem ve'el tuvo. What is tuvo? Tuvo refers to the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, which means that these are the three things eventually the people of Israel, when they return to the land, or when redemption comes place, they're going to have these focal points on their mind. King David, of course God, and the temple itself. These are the three concepts. Now this is what's constantly we should be yearning for and striving for. The people of Israel, unfortunately, instead of striving and wanting really the King David, wanting the temple, wanting to really a relationship with God, they were enjoying from this banquet that already claimed despair, no more temple, no more Israel, no more God. It's all Persia now. It's all a new world, a new empire, and forget it's all some kind of new world, and no Israel. And this is what they enjoyed. They sort of were complacent in their Persian lifestyle. Or they were enjoying themselves, feeling very comfortably, materialistically, whatever they had, and not even wanting to enjoy in God, in His temple, in King David, to feel that lacking in their hearts. Unfortunately, it was a wonderful thing happened this week, but I say unfortunately, I'll tell you why, because there were 17 Yemenite Jews that were taken out of Yemen and brought back to the land of Israel. Amazing timing. And when they got to the absorption center to absorb them, what happened? They were claimed that they had it better in Yemen, because in Yemen they had cars and telephones, whatever. But of course, without judging anyone, but in a way, you see how it was very hard. There were 50 Yemenite Jews that didn't want to leave. They're still in Yemen. They don't want to leave. They're the last ones left. They refused to leave. This is the issue here. When people have an opportunity, to enjoy in their materialistic lifestyle. Right, they have that opportunity. Sometimes they choose that instead of having the heart yearn for the temple, for King David to restore the house of David, and of course for the relationship with Hashem. All these aspects are so important. It's interesting. The Midrash, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai talks about this. Is that because of these three particular reasons, this is why God brings up an evil king like Haman, so that we should wake up and realize and feel these things lacking in our hearts. This is the most important thing. And what are they saying? These three things refer to relationship with Hashem, a spiritual relationship with God. The house of David, which means building, we're striving for the Messiah coming, building the land. And of course, building our temple. And here it's not referring to, there are other commandments, of course, in the Torah, many other commandments, but those are not being stressed over here. The person continue doing those commandments in exile. But we're still going to be deserving of extermination, God forbid, if we don't wake up and realize that we have to strive in our hearts for the three important elements, the pillars which the entire nation stands upon. And that's what the holiday Purim is all about, when I opened up with. These pillars, the pillar of the temple, we give the half a shekel, reminds us of the temple. And that's what we have to recall. Let's feel the temple lacking. We want to rebuild our temple. Stands out very strongly. And of course, understanding Hashem, seeing how good divine providence is behind everything in our lives. And feeling that lacking. When God hides His face from us, He's creating a vacuum for us to find Him. And that's of course Hashem. And of course, King David, the temple, coming back to the land of Israel. It's all reflected. The vessels of the temple were used in that party by Achashverosh. And we have to realize these temples have to bring Him back. The whole concept was to bring Him back to the land. And to believe that Hashem will redeem us and build our temple, and to work, strive for it, to feel it lacking. And all these things, again, our showing of brotherly love on the holiday of Purim is all connected to unite our people, to bring us all together. We shouldn't be scattered. This is what Haman said. Look at these people, they're scattered about all over the world. When we're scattered about, we bring about this evil king of Haman. I heard sometimes, I can't stand when people say this. This is the greatest thing that Jews are scattered all over the world that brings safety to them. It's ridiculous stupidity. It brings exile to us. When God says to us, we will bring you together. Lech knoset kol Yudim, in the land of Israel. That's the whole goal. So the Shalach Manot and showing our love for one another is to try to reunite us all together under one roof in the land of Israel through brotherly love. That's uniting. We can't be united when we're scattered about the world. That's the really message, the important message of Purim. Lech knoset kol Yudim, bring all the Jews together. Now this is the amazing thing also about the name of Mordechai. Mordechai was called a Yehudi. Why was Mordechai called Yehudi? He was also called Ish Yemini, from Benjamin. Well, was he from Judah or from Benjamin? In reality, he was from Benjamin, but he was called Yehudi because what does it mean to be Jewish? It says, Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachva, he didn't bow down to Haman. And when they asked him, and they said he's a Jew. Why? Because a Jew bows down to one and the only God. That's what a Jew does. Ish Yehudi. A Jew has those values. He's striving for the values of a Jew. And that's building the temple and being strong and overcoming all obstacle to get back and to build a temple and not to be complacent in exile. We're all, again, unfortunately, there's so many of those who are still very complacent in exile. And that is preventing us from our final redemption. So wake up and realize that is the message. And that is why the story of Purim will be here forever. Because that is really the whole point of humanity. To strive to build God's kingdom in the land of Israel. And Israel will strive forever and be a light to the nations. Purim Sameach, Shabbat Shalom, B'sorot Tovot, Yeshuot V'nechama.